All right, listeners, ready to hit the trail. Today, we're tackling the Lewis and Clark expedition, specifically their 1804 push up the Missouri River.
A journey that really captures the spirit of early America.
We've got excerpts from the American History Tellers podcast to guide us.
Should be a fascinating deep dive.
Definitely. We're talking President Jefferson's vision, the nitty-gritty of river travel, and of course, those all-important first encounters with Native American tribes.
It's crucial to remember this wasn't just about exploring for the sake of exploring. This expedition represented a nation's ambition, its dreams playing out on a massive scale.
So more than just a bunch of guys heading west for kicks.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
President Jefferson envisioned an American empire that stretched all the way to the Pacific.
Wow, coast to coast. What fueled this grand vision?
Multiple factors, actually. You've got the scientific drive, the economic potential, and let's not forget the geopolitical realities of the time.
This was a period when European powers were still vying for control of North America, right?
Exactly. And when Jefferson read Alexander Mackenzie's account of reaching the Pacific by land, it raised some serious concerns. The British were already a dominant force in the fur trade.
So control of the West was about more than just land. It was about resources and economic power.
Precisely. And that's where the Louisiana Purchase comes into play. It was a strategic move that dramatically expanded U.S. territory. And with that expansion came an urgency to find a water route to the Pacific.
I can see how those pieces fit together. Control the land, control the resources, and find a way to get them to market.
Exactly. Jefferson imagined a continuous waterway up the Missouri, across the Rockies, and then down the Columbia River to the Pacific.
Ambitious, to say the least. But he needed the right person to lead this risky endeavor. Someone tough, someone resourceful.
Someone, perhaps, a little bit unconventional.
Is that where Meriwether Lewis enters the picture? Jefferson's personal secretary?
The very same. Jefferson saw in Lewis a man who was not only skilled in wilderness navigation, but also deeply passionate about westward expansion. Someone who shared his vision.
But I've heard Lewis had a, shall we say, colorful personality.
Well, colorful might be putting it mildly. He had his struggles with depression, and let's just say he had a tendency to act impulsively, especially after a few drinks.
There's that famous story about him being court-martialed for challenging a superior officer to a duel, right? After a night of drinking, no less.
Yes, that story is true. But amidst those personality quirks, Jefferson also recognized Lewis's strengths, his bravery, his meticulous nature. The man was a stickler for details, and he had a deep understanding of the task at hand. It was a gamble, no doubt, but Jefferson was willing to take it.
So Lewis gets the nod. What were his first steps in planning this monumental expedition?
Well, before even thinking about the Pacific, there was the Missouri to conquer.
Ah, yes, the mighty Missouri.
In August of 1803, Lewis heads down the Ohio River on a 55-foot keelboat.
55 feet. That's no ordinary canoe.
Not at all. This was a serious vessel built to haul supplies, equipment, and a crew, enough for months on end.
Makes sense. They weren't planning on popping over to the Pacific and back in a weekend. What about smaller boats for navigating tricky parts of the river?
He had a couple of those too, called pirogues. Much more maneuverable, perfect for shallow water and those tight spots.
So the boats are sorted. What about supplies? What did they pack for this epic journey?
You name it, they probably had it. Compasses, sextants, surveying equipment, the essentials for mapping the unknown.
Of course, gotta chart the course.
And then there were the muskets, rifles, plenty gunpowder and lead, just in case. Plus, a whole assortment of trade goods, gifts for Native American tribes, and even scientific instruments to study the climate and geography of the West.
Like a traveling laboratory and trading post all rolled into one. Packing for that trip must have been a nightmare.
Logistical marvel, more like it. But to answer your earlier question, Lewis was heading to Louisville, Kentucky.
Rendezvous Point, that's where he was to meet up with his co-captain, William Clark, right?
Exactly. The dynamic duo, soon to be legendary.
What did Clark bring to the table? What made him the ideal partner for Lewis?
Well, Clark was a seasoned frontiersman, a natural leader, skilled in surveying, map-making, wilderness survival, all that good stuff.
The practical, steady hand to balance out Lewis's, shall we say, more mercurial nature.
You could say that. But perhaps most importantly, he had a knack for leadership, a calming presence that complemented Lewis's sometimes impulsive nature.
The perfect foil to Lewis's fire. So they meet up in Louisville and start assembling their crew. What kind of men were they looking for? Lumberjacks, mountain men.
They needed a mix of talents and toughness, men skilled in various trades,
Hmm.
blacksmithing, carpentry, hunting, even medicine. And of course, they needed to be physically fit, able to withstand the rigors of the journey.
Not a trip for the faint of heart. Did they put these recruits through some kind of wilderness boot camp?
You could say that. The recruitment process was pretty intense. Take William Bratton, for example. To prove his marksmanship, he had to shoot a target 100 yards away with a Kentucky long rifle in front of a crowd.
Talk about pressure.
Imagine that.
So by December of 1803, they've got their crew of about 30 men, including Clark's enslaved man York, and they've reached St. Louis. Ready to roll, right?
Eager to set off,
Hmm.
absolutely. But their plans hit a snag. A geopolitical snag, you might say.
Oh, what happened?
St. Louis was still under Spanish control at the time.
Ah, of course. The Louisiana Purchase, though a done deal in principle, hadn't quite been finalized on the ground, and Spain wasn't exactly thrilled about losing this territory.
You got it. And they weren't too keen on a bunch of American explorers poking around further west either.
Caught between empires. What did they do while they waited for the political gears to turn?
They weren't idle. They used the time to gather more supplies, strengthen relationships with local fur trappers.
Those fur trappers must have been a gold mine of information about the river and the Native American tribes further upriver, especially those powerful Sioux
Well,
tribes.
they were full of stories, all right. And warnings, too. Tales of the Sioux' dominance on the Missouri, their reputation for demanding tolls from travelers, even hints of potential hostility towards the expedition.
So, on top of the delay, they now had to worry about potential conflict with powerful tribes. Not exactly the ideal start to their westward adventure.
Not ideal, no. And remember, they were carrying a significant amount of valuable goods, weapons, and ammunition, making them a prime target for anyone looking to make a quick profit or disrupt the expedition entirely. The stakes were high, and the risks were real.
Okay, so the tension is building. Did the Spanish finally give them the green light?
Finally, in March of 1804, the Louisiana Purchase is officially finalized. St. Louis becomes U.S. territory, and the Corps of Discovery is free to proceed.
Must have been a huge relief. What was it like when they finally set off on this historic journey?
Imagine it. May 14th, 1804. They set sail from Camp du Bois near St. Charles, Missouri. Their boats are laden with supplies, their journals filled with anticipation, and their hearts, I imagine, filled with a mix of excitement and trepidation.
Excitement for the adventure ahead and trepidation for the unknown.
Exactly. They were heading into the vast unknown, embarking on a journey that would change the course of American history.
What an incredible moment, a true turning point. But I'm guessing the Missouri River didn't exactly roll out the welcome mat. What kind of challenges did they face right off the bat?
Oh, right from the start, the Missouri proved to be a formidable adversary. It wasn't some gentle stream. It was a powerful, unpredictable force of nature,
I bet. I've seen pictures, and that river is wide.
wide and constantly changing. They battled strong currents, fallen trees that created dangerous obstacles, shifting sandbars that could ground their boats in an instant. And in many places, the water was so shallow, they were forced to engage in backbreaking labor, poling and dragging that heavy keelboat upstream.
Sounds utterly exhausting. I can't imagine the physical toll it must have taken on them.
It was grueling work,
Mhm.
and they were constantly battling exhaustion, hunger, exposure to the elements. And it wasn't just the physical challenges that tested them, there were health issues too.
Health issues? Like what?
Boils, dysentery, relentless insect bites, all those fun things that come with exploring uncharted territory. Every day was a struggle.
It's hard to imagine trying to explore a new world while battling dysentery. I'd probably just want to curl up under a tree and wait for it to pass.
Can't blame you.
Yeah.
But these men were driven. And remember, this was just the beginning of their journey. They had over 7,000 miles to cover before reaching the Pacific. It was a monumental undertaking, and the challenges they faced on the Missouri River were just a taste of what lay ahead.
Wow, what a start. So they're battling the river, battling illness, but I imagine there were also moments of wonder and discovery along the way. Did they have any encounters with Native American tribes during this early stage of their journey?
They did, and these encounters were crucial, not just for the success of the expedition, but also for shaping the future relationship between the United States and the Native American tribes of the West. Their first significant encounter was with the Odo tribe in late August of 1804.
This must have been a pivotal moment, putting Jefferson's vision of peaceful diplomacy to the test. What was it like? Did the Odo tribe roll out the red carpet for these American explorers?
Not quite a red carpet. Remember, the Odo tribe had their own complex history, their own relationships with other tribes, and their own way of life that had existed for centuries before Lewis and Clark arrived. It wasn't a simple meet and greet.
So, walking into that situation, how did Lewis handle this first diplomatic encounter? Did he have a plan?
Oh, he had a plan, all right. Lewis, dressed in his full military uniform, delivered a carefully prepared speech outlining the change in ownership of the land. He emphasized that the Odo tribe was now under the jurisdiction of the United States and President Jefferson.
A bold statement. I imagine that didn't go over too well.
Well, he tried to soften the blow by stressing the importance of peace and trade, but he also included a subtle warning about the consequences of displeasing their new great father, President Jefferson.
A bit of a mixed message, isn't it? We come in peace, but don't mess with us. How did the Oto react to all of this?
It's hard to say for sure. Lewis himself admitted in his journal that he couldn't quite gauge their reaction. There were obvious language barriers and cultural differences that made communication incredibly complex. Even with the best of intentions, there was a lot of room for misunderstanding.
I can only imagine. So they delivered their speech, but did they manage to part ways on good terms?
They exchanged gifts. The Odo received items like blankets, beads, and those iconic Jefferson Peace Medals.
Those medals were meant to symbolize peace and friendship, weren't they?
That was the intention, yes. But whether those gifts were seen as genuine gestures of friendship or subtle forms of coercion is a matter of debate among historians.
That's a really interesting point. It makes you think about the power dynamics at play and the different ways those gifts might have been interpreted. Did they encounter any other tribes during this early stage of their journey?
They did. A few weeks later, they had another encounter, this time with the Yankton Sioux.
The Sioux? Weren't those the ones the fur trappers had warned them about?
Some bands of Sioux, yes, but the Yankton Sioux were generally known to be more peaceful than some of their brethren.
Ah, okay. So a slightly less tense encounter, hopefully?
Slightly less tense, perhaps. But even this encounter revealed the complexities of intertribal relations and the challenges of navigating those relationships as outsiders.
So even among the Sioux, there were different factions with their own interests and allegiances. That must have made things even more challenging for Lewis and Clark.
Absolutely. And lurking in the background was another potential threat.
Oh, hmm. Who else was causing trouble?
The Spanish.
Ah, right. They were still smarting from the Louisiana Purchase, weren't they?
You bet they were. They were deeply suspicious of the expedition's true intentions. They even sent a group of soldiers to try and intercept Lewis and Clark, hoping to stop them in their tracks.
Wow, a near miss with the Spanish. So they're dealing with intertribal dynamics, the watchful eye of a rival European power, and oh yeah, they're also trying to navigate one of the most challenging rivers on the continent.
It was a lot to juggle.
Did they manage to make any headway up the Missouri despite all these obstacles?
They did. They continued pushing north, deeper into Sioux territory. And that's where things start to get really tense. Their next encounter with the powerful Teton Sioux would prove to be one of the most pivotal moments of their entire journey.
The Teton Sioux. Those are the ones the fur trappers were most worried about, right?
The very same.
Yeah.
Known for their fierce independence, their control of the Missouri River, and their, shall we say, less than welcoming attitude towards outsiders. This encounter was a real turning point. The Teton Sioux, they were a different story than those earlier tribes. They weren't interested in Jefferson's peace medals or promises of trade.
Not easily swayed.
Nope, not at all. They saw the Corps of Discovery as a threat, plain and simple. Another wave of outsiders encroaching on their territory, disrupting their way of life.
So how did this tension play out when these two forces collided on the Missouri?
Well, picture this. It's September 1804. The Corps is making progress up the Missouri, slow going but steady. But they're heading right into the heart of Teton Sioux territory. And this tribe, they controlled a significant stretch of the river, powerful and fiercely independent.
And with that reputation for demanding tolls, right? Anyone passing through their territory had to pay up.
That's right. And they weren't afraid to use force to get their way.
Okay, so the stage is set for a showdown. Did Lewis and Clark try to appease the Teton Sioux, or was it a guns-blazing approach?
They tried diplomacy first, always a good starting point. Invited the Teton chiefs aboard their keelboat, hoping to, establish a dialogue, secure safe passage.
Sounds reasonable. Offer them some gifts, show them you're not a threat.
Exactly. They offered gifts, displayed their weapons as a show of strength, kind of a mixed message there, and explained through interpreters that they were on a peaceful mission of exploration.
We come in peace, but we're packing heat.
Something like that. But the Teton chiefs weren't easily swayed. They saw right through the attempts to impress and intimidate.
Saw right through the facade. So what happened?
They demanded more valuable tribute. You see, they argued the Missouri River was their lifeblood. Anyone passing through had to pay their dues.
I can see their point. The river was essential to their survival.
Absolutely. And they weren't about to let these newcomers just waltz through without acknowledging that.
So things are getting heated. How did Lewis and Clark react to these demands?
They tried to negotiate, as any good diplomat would, but the Teton chiefs weren't backing down.
A clash of wills.
One chief in particular, he was incredibly vocal, denouncing the Americans as intruders, challenging Clark's authority. Things escalated pretty quickly.
Oh, I bet.
This chief, in a moment of anger, frustration, called Clark a hideous offspring of a flea-ridden dog, demanded more tribute.
Those are some serious insults. I can't imagine Clark taking that lightly.
He didn't. Clark was furious. He drew his sword, and for a moment it looked like things could spiral out of control.
A real powder keg situation.
Teton warriors on the shore, they grabbed the rope of the pirogue. The one carrying the chiefs back to shore, preventing it from leaving.
Trapped.
Corps members on the boat drew their pistols. Teton warriors on the riverbank aimed their bows and arrows. The tension, you could cut it with a knife.
Wow, that's a scene straight out of a Western. How do they avoid a full-blown battle?
It really is remarkable that cooler heads prevailed. It was a tense standoff for sure.
Someone must have blinked.
Some accounts suggest that a Teton chief intervened, realized that a fight would benefit neither side.
A moment of wisdom.
Others argue that Lewis, seeing the situation getting out of hand, ordered the keelboat's cannon to be loaded, aimed at the shore.
A show of force, a last-ditch effort to deter them.
Whatever the reason, the landing party managed to escape back to the keelboat. But that encounter, it left a lasting mark.
It's easy to imagine. So they avoided bloodshed, but at what cost? What were the long-term consequences of this clash with the Teton Sioux?
It shattered Jefferson's hope for a peaceful, unified front with the Sioux tribes.
The Teton Sioux, they weren't going to be won over easily.
Not by peace medals or threats. They remained a potential threat throughout the journey.
A constant reminder of the fragile peace.
In this encounter, it highlighted the limitations of Lewis and Clark's approach to diplomacy. They went in with certain expectations, but the reality was much more complex.
The human element, always complicating things.
The Teton Sioux weren't the only ones watching either. Other tribes were taking note of how the Americans handled this situation.
Observing their strengths, their weaknesses, judging their character.
Exactly. This encounter shaped future interactions with Native American tribes throughout the expedition.
A ripple effect. So, after this near disaster, did Lewis and Clark just keep pushing upriver, hoping for the best?
They continued, yes, but with a heightened sense of caution.
More aware of the risks, more attuned to the complexities.
They were entering a new phase of their expedition, a phase where diplomacy, strategy, understanding the human landscape, those were as crucial as wilderness survival skills. Their next goal, the Mandan villages, further up the Missouri.
Hoping for a more hospitable reception, perhaps.
They hoped so. They needed to gather information about the route ahead.
Always looking forward, planning the next move.
The Mandan villages, they were a significant turning point in the journey. Not necessarily in the way they expected, though.
A twist in the tale.
When they arrived in late October of 1804, after over 150 days and 1,600 miles of grueling travel, they were met with a sobering sight.
What did they find?
The site of a Mandan village, yes. But instead of a bustling community, silence.
Deserted.
The lodges were abandoned, the remains of the Mandan people scattered on the ground. It was a stark reminder of the devastating impact of European diseases, smallpox particularly. It ravaged many Native American populations.
A tragic reminder of the unseen forces shaping their journey.
It's a crucial part of the story. The Mandan, like so many tribes, they were already grappling with the consequences of contact with Europeans, even before Lewis and Clark.
Disease as a precursor to expansion.
Faced with this ghost village, what did they do? They pressed on, determined to find the Mandan.
The Mandan were known for their role as traders, intermediaries between different tribes, right?
Exactly. They eventually found 2 surviving villages near the Knife River. And what they discovered there was a stark contrast to that abandoned village.
So they did find a thriving community after all.
Vibrant hubs of trade and cultural exchange. The Mandan had established themselves as skilled intermediaries in the fur trade, connecting tribes from all corners of the Great Plains with European goods.
A melting pot of cultures.
They were known for their agriculture, their earth lodges, their complex social structures, and yes, they welcomed Lewis and Clark.
A welcome respite.
They saw potential allies,
Yeah.
particularly in their conflicts with the Sioux.
Always a strategic element to these encounters. So the core discovery finds place to rest, replenish supplies, learn more about the land and its people.
They established Fort Mandan, their winter quarters, spent months learning from the Mandan people.
Gathering intel.
They learned about the Rocky Mountains, the vast plains beyond, the Shoshone, who controlled the passes through the mountains.
Vital information. Did they manage to build a rapport with the Mandan, or was there an underlying tension?
It was complex, as you can imagine.
Bound to be some mistrust.
The Mandan were wary of these newcomers, but they also saw the potential benefits of aligning themselves with the Americans, especially against the Sioux, a delicate balancing act.
Walking a tightrope. So they coexisted peacefully throughout the winter, but they couldn't stay at Fort Mandan forever.
Spring was coming, and they had to keep moving. To cross the Rockies, they needed horses.
And horses meant dealing with the Shoshone, a tribe they hadn't met, whose language they didn't speak. A whole new challenge.
During their time at the Mandan villages, they met a French-Canadian fur trapper, Toussaint Charbonneau. He'd been living among the Mandan and Hidatsa tribes.
A potential interpreter.
He offered his services, yes, but there was a catch. He didn't actually speak Shoshone.
Wait, what? How could he be helpful then?
His wife, Sacagawea, she was Shoshone, kidnapped as a child, ended up living with the Mandan.
So a multi-step translation process. Shoshone to Hidatsa, Hidatsa to French, French to English. That's like a game of telephone bound to get messy.
It was a complicated system, for sure. But Lewis and Clark had no other options.
Desperate times. Okay, so they had their interpreter, their winter quarters, they were learning about the route ahead. But winter was coming. A harsh Dakota winter.
It was brutal. Temperatures plummeted, the Missouri froze over. They relied heavily on the Mandan and Hidatsa for food and support.
Forging bonds of necessity.
And in the midst of all this, Sacagawea gave birth.
Wow. A baby born at Fort Mandan. What a story.
A son, Jean-Baptiste Charbonneau. Lewis, who had some medical training, assisted with the birth.
The president's secretary delivering a baby on the American frontier.
This baby became a symbol of hope for the expedition, and a reminder of their dependence on the goodwill of Native Americans.
A powerful symbol. Spring eventually arrived, though, and they had to move on. It must have been bittersweet to leave Fort Mandan.
They were leaving behind a place of shelter, a source of knowledge, and a community that had helped them survive. And they were leaving behind the keelboat.
The keelboat.
It had carried them so far. Along with a small group of men who were tasked with returning to President Jefferson with information and specimens. But Lewis and Clark, they were heading west, carrying with them the hopes of a nation.
Into the unknown. What was it like as they ventured further west?
The landscape changed dramatically. Rolling hills gave way to rugged canyons, dense forests, powerful rapids that threatened to capsize their boats.
The terrain getting tougher, the risks higher.
They faced grizzly bears, far larger and more ferocious than anything they'd encountered before, relied on their ingenuity and teamwork to survive.
It sounds terrifying. How did they keep their spirits up amidst all this?
They were driven by a thirst for knowledge, a desire to map this vast territory, the belief that their journey would pave the way for American expansion.
And through it all, they had Sacagawea. Did her presence affect their interactions with the tribes they encountered?
Absolutely. Her presence eased tensions, and her ability to communicate with the Shoshone would be key to crossing the Rockies.
A vital asset. But as they approached the Rocky Mountains, I imagine the reality of their situation must have set in. Those mountains, they're a formidable barrier.
There must have been moments of doubt, moments of despair.
Did they ever consider turning back?
They pressed on, driven by their mission, their curiosity, and perhaps a bit of stubborn determination. The fate of the expedition, maybe even the future of American expansion, rested on their ability to cross those mountains. And they knew the key to their success lay with the Shoshone people.
A tribe they'd never met, whose language they didn't speak, whose intentions were unknown. What happened next? Did they make contact?
In August of 1805, they encountered a Shoshone band. It was Sacagawea who made the connection. She recognized the chief as her brother.
Her brother, you're kidding.
Separated years earlier during a raid. After all those years, all those miles, reunited with her family in this vast wilderness at this crucial moment in their journey.
Fate, it seems, was on their side. But did this reunion guarantee safe passage?
It was tense, emotional. The Shoshone were wary. But Sacagawea's presence, her story, her connection to their chief, it helped to bridge the gap.
Building trust through shared humanity. So they forged a connection thanks to Sacagawea. But did they get the practical help they needed? Horses, guides to cross the mountains.
The Shoshone, moved by Sacagawea's story, recognizing the Corps' peaceful intentions, they agreed. They provided horses and guides to help them navigate those treacherous mountain passes.
An incredible turning point. Sacagawea, she was more than an interpreter, she was a cultural ambassador.
Without her, who knows what would have happened?
So they could finally cross the Rocky Mountains, but I imagine that journey was anything but easy.
It was incredibly challenging. Harsh weather, dwindling supplies, treacherous terrain. They relied on their Shoshone guides, their own ingenuity, and sheer will to survive.
But they made it.
They reached the Columbia River and eventually the Pacific Ocean. November 1806.
What a moment! They'd crossed the continent, mapped vast stretches of unknown territory, established relationships with numerous Native American tribes.
Their journey had a profound impact on American history, shaping westward expansion, influencing policy towards Native American tribes.
Inspiring generations to come. It's a story that captures the imagination.
But it's also a story that raises questions about the impact of their journey on Native American tribes, on the environment.
The consequences of exploration, the ripple effects that extend far beyond the journey itself. We'll delve into those questions and the legacy of Lewis and Clark in the final part of our deep dive. Okay, so Lewis and Clark, they reached the Pacific Ocean in November of 1806. An incredible achievement, but as you mentioned, it's a story with a complex legacy. What happened after they reached their goal? Did they just turn around and head back to Washington, D.C., mission accomplished?
Not exactly. They spent the winter of 1805, 1806 near the mouth of the Columbia River, built a fort they called Fort Clatsop, named after the local Clatsop tribe.
So even after reaching the Pacific, they kept exploring, still driven by that thirst for knowledge.
Oh, yeah. They continued their observations, documenting the plants and animals, interacting with the Native American tribes along the coast. Their work wasn't finished just because they'd reached the ocean.
They were collecting so much information about a land that was largely unknown to European Americans at the time. Mapping, journaling, observing.
True pioneers, pushing the boundaries of knowledge. But by the spring of 1806, it was time to think about heading back. And they were thousands of miles from home. Their supplies were dwindling. The return journey was going to be just as challenging, if not more so.
I can only imagine. What were some of the biggest challenges they faced on the way back east?
Well, they still had to deal with those rapids and mountain passes, but now they were doing it with exhausted men and equipment. Plus, there was a growing sense of urgency to get home.
Makes sense. They'd been gone a long time.
And they faced new challenges too. Some tribes had grown wary of their presence, and there were growing tensions between the U.S. and Great Britain over control of the fur trade.
So the stakes were even higher on the return trip. Did they make it back to St. Louis safely?
They did, September 1806. After more than 2 years away, they were greeted as heroes, their journey seen as a symbol of America's westward destiny.
It's an incredible story of courage and determination. It's no wonder it captured the imagination of the nation.
It had a huge impact on American history, shaping westward expansion, influencing government policy towards Native American tribes. Their journey opened up the West.
But it's important to remember that their story is just one part of a much larger and longer story, a story that continues to this day. Their journey was a turning point, but it also marked the beginning of a long and often tragic era for many Native American tribes.
You're absolutely right. We can't forget about the impact of westward expansion on the people who were already living here.
As we wrap up this deep dive, what do you think is the most important thing for listeners to take away from the story of Lewis and Clark?
I think it reminds us that exploration is about more than just physical journeys. It's about pushing the boundaries of knowledge, encountering different cultures, learning and growing.
It's a reminder that history is full of complexity. There's triumph and tragedy, discovery and loss. It's our responsibility to learn from the past and move forward with greater awareness and understanding.
Well said. And maybe, as you continue to explore this story, consider this. What if Lewis and Clark had approached their encounters with Native American tribes differently? With more humility or willingness to learn from them? How might this story of westward expansion have unfolded? Something to think about.
A great question to ponder. Thanks for guiding us through this incredible journey. And thanks to our listeners for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, keep exploring.